Hello and welcome to Watching the Tudors. I'm Heather.
And I'm Jonathan.
And this is the show where we rewatch or watch, depending on your perspective, the Tudors and talk about the stories behind the drama, the history behind the drama. So I have another podcast. I'm Heather. I have another podcast, the Renaissance English History podcast that I've been doing since 2009. And I thought it would be fun to go back and watch this series and see what was real and what was dramatic license.
And I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to learn a little bit about the history that my wife is so into and that I know pretty much nothing about. I'm learning a lot through this series.
Yes, you are.
But yes, before that, I basically know almost nothing about history. I like the present and the future.
So we are now in Season 2, Episode 5, and it's called His Majesty's Pleasure. And spoiler alert.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the episode, so if you haven't seen it, you might want to watch it first before listening to this. And we're also going to talk about things that happen after this episode as well. So we may give away things like the fact that Anne Boleyn loses her head. So if you didn't know that, sorry, there you go.
So in this episode, some stuff happens. Like, Thomas More dies, Anne Boleyn has a miscarriage, Bishop Fisher dies. It's all starting to unravel for poor Anne.
It's all falling apart.
It's all falling apart for her. So, I think we just start to see Henry kind of descending into the tyrant we will remember him as, and being deeply affected by what's happening here. And everybody around him is starting to freak out in different ways. Anne Boleyn's starting to freak out. There's a lot of freaking out.
And I would just imagine that, people like Cromwell and stuff would be freaking out too, because it's like he killed More. I mean, like of course he would kill, anyone else.
Yes.
It's like no one's safe. Like, ugh.
Yes.
All right.
So you want to jump into the questions?
Sure.
All right.
So early in I don't know if it was the first scene, but early, More's family came to visit him in jail, and I just wonder if that happened, or if that was something that could have happened to people like that in jail.
Sure. Well, it's important to remember that the Tower of London was not really a prison per se. We tend to remember it as a prison. It was a secure royal palace. So the White Tower was built right after William the Conqueror came to England, and this is a royal palace that had where the monarchs would spend the night before they were crowned, and it was a place that was a secure royal palace, as opposed to maybe Hampton Court that was kind of more out there and wasn't as secure. So during times of rebellion, the monarchs would go there to be safe and stuff like that. So it wasn't set up as a jail per se. It was it was used as a jail, and there were torture chambers and everything like that. But there was a person who was like the constable of the tower, and that's where people who were high up people would have stayed. Regular criminals who were just in jail for regular stuff, they wouldn't have gone to the tower. They would have gone to like Newgate or some other prison. But if you were a high up prisoner, you would have gone to the tower, and you would have stayed at the constable of the tower's pleasure. And you would have been in a cell that was almost rather comfortable in a way, depending on who you were. So yes, he would have had access to his papers, and at least at first, and he would have had visitors and everything like that. Eventually they did take his papers, like it shows, and there's a story where he then closed his window up completely, boarded up, or like closed the curtains, and they asked him why he had done that, and he said, well, now that all my papers are gone, I don't have any reason to have my windows open. So yeah, he would have had visitors.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. And then his family was saying that they were going to, have everything taken away. Like, did they really lose everything, that they sort of had?
Yeah, well, all of his lands would have been confiscated. All of his titles were originally at the pleasure of the king. So everything that the king had given him, the king could take away. So, yeah, then at that point it was up to them either for the women to get married again. At that point, they had to decide what they were going to do.
Live for themselves, just figure out a way.
Yeah.
And So, what would that look like? Just them getting married? I mean, would they have other options?
It could look like if the king took pity on the women, which a lot of times the king would, because the king would say, well, it was your husband, it wasn't you. So he would give them some small
small amount
something
that would
just
keep them fed.
Yeah. And the other thing he would do is try and get married again quite quickly with somebody like Thomas More. I could imagine that people would be interested in marrying into that family because he was famous. Mm-hmm. So even though they didn't have a lot of money at that point.
So you might marry like someone who might be in court or like some...
Or random... a lawyer who admired Thomas More. And also you would have, like, Thomas More was a lawyer, right? So he had a lot of colleagues. So you would have somebody that, had, just like now, if a woman's husband dies and he doesn't have good life insurance, what does she do? Mm-hmm. And maybe somebody who was a friend, maybe somebody from the office takes up a donation.
I guess
they set up a GoFundMe.
I guess what I wonder is, I obviously don't have a very good picture of how people lived back then. And in my mind, there was like the king and his court, and like these nobles, like the Duke of Norwich or whatever.
Yeah.
And then everyone else was like poor serf people that were eating dirt.
Yeah.
And like, I guess there was people kind of in the middle, or...
Yeah. Well, this is actually a period where we actually see a rise in the middle class. It's one of the things I think is so interesting about this period is this change from a feudal society to one of early modern society. So there was a rising middle class. There was a professional class. There were merchants. There were business people.
Okay, so
there were lawyers.
They might have married a merchant or something and been sort of well taken care of.
Yeah.
Relatively.
So by this point, a lot of his children already were married. Mm-hmm. So they would have had husbands taking care of them, as it were. And, his wife would have relied on, well, I can just...
Either her kids taking care of her or pity from the... Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then she said, we're going to go into penury. Like, what does penury mean for... people with vocabularies like mine?
It means being really broke.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're in penury now, it just means you've got like nothing. Like it's beyond broke. It's oh my gosh, I've got nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Anne. So moving on, Anne really did have a miscarriage. Yes.
Yes, she did. She had a miscarriage in 1535. Okay. Yes.
And do we have any idea if it was as dramatic? I mean, we've gone through a miscarriage, and it wasn't like you were in the middle of a big party and you collapsed, and do we have any idea if this was the case? Or?
I don't know how dramatic it was.
Okay, so there aren't like records.
There's records that she lost a child,
but not the exact nature of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, just so you know, I just looked it up, and with Alice, she was given an annuity, a smaller annuity, after Thomas More died to live on after he died. So she was given £20 a year.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
£20 a year sounds like, that gets you a a lot.
I know. Yeah. You could eat at Pret a Manger.
Yeah. Once. All right. So Bishop Fisher, yes?
Yes.
Bishop Fisher. Shall we now call him Cardinal Fisher? Mm-hmm. Did he really write a letter? Who was it? Cromwell brought in this letter and said, we've intercepted this letter. Do we know that he wrote a letter? Would he have written? I mean, how would you get a letter like that out of... I guess.
Yeah, he was engaged in secret activities to overthrow Henry as early as 1531. He apparently, this is 4 years before where we are here.
Okay.
He began communicating with the foreign diplomats.
Wow.
And suggesting that they invade England and depose Henry.
He's always been, I said it when he stood up and spoke his mind. He's always been very, brave, outspoken.
Yeah.
So I guess.
And in terms of how you would smuggle letters like that, I mean, there were a number of different ways. Though one of the ways later on, this is 50 years later, but Mary Queen of Scots was brought down. When she was in jail, she was communicating by putting letters in a barrel of beer. And so, if he had somebody who was a supporter that he could smuggle a letter out to, and then that person put it in, food or something like that was going out, you could get letters out that way.
All right. It's just, that's wild to me.
Yeah.
And then he was really made a cardinal,
yes,
while he was in jail.
Yes, I think they thought that Henry wouldn't kill a cardinal. I think they did it kind of as a last ditch attempt to try to save his life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because cardinals are really big. I'm not clear on the hierarchy.
Yeah, it's like the next higher. Yeah, it's as high as you can.
It's as high, like there's popes and then there's cardinal, or not like popes, but there's the pope and then cardinals.
Yeah.
And then, all right. And they have the big hats, yeah, big pointy.
The big red hats. Yeah.
Nice hat.
Yeah.
Catherine. So now we see Catherine for a minute. She was really asked to sign the oath.
Yes, she was.
I'm guessing she didn't sign it.
Well, she said, and she made a good logical point. She said that if the marriage was never happened, then she was not a subject
I'm not important.
of the king.
Yeah.
No, she wasn't she was a subject
not even,
of Spain.
I'm not important. I'm not even an English person.
Right. There's I don't owe any kind of loyalty to Henry.
I'm just living abroad.
Exactly. So, yeah, she made that argument.
And
Mary too.
And she got away with it, so she didn't have to sign it.
Yeah.
Okay. And did Mary...
Mary never signed it either, but she did later on, we'll see, she had to write a letter admitting that she was a bastard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Fisher and Moore, do we know that they really had contact like that?
They would have been able to do something.
Someone would have said something.
They had a number of supporters, there were people, their jailers would have supported them in a way. They were, really, this Reformation not everybody thought they were, bad. A lot of people supported them, as we see at the end with all the crowds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So they weren't just like enemies to everyone. It was more just enemies of the king and his little cronies.
Yeah.
And then we see Mary Boleyn coming in pregnant and marrying a sailor, or a soldier.
Yeah.
So that was all accurate.
Yes.
She married who? It's
William
Stafford. And he was just a soldier.
She just married a common man.
Yeah. Yeah. Because she loved him.
Because she loved him and he loved her.
And they got pregnant. Do we know if it was right at the same time? I mean, do we know?
Yeah, it was during this time. Yep.
Okay, so something I'd like a little explanation about. I really don't understand, the fact that she needs permission to marry.
Yes.
To be married. Can you explain that?
Well, because, so to start with, if you were in any way royal, your marriage could be a negotiating tactic for the king. So that's one thing.
Oh, okay. So
the same way, and especially since he didn't have children, that he could marry. He only had
so it wasn't like he had 5 children to marry off to people.
2 at this point, yeah. So he could have used that as some kind of a negotiating ploy. Also, anybody that you marry is then going to become royal as well. And you even see it now. I mean, you saw it with Kate Middleton and the way everybody was kind of how long it took, what a big deal it was for him to have married a commoner, as it were. And she was, not really a commoner.
Yeah.
And so to actually marry a soldier in France,
a straight up, commoner.
Yeah. And that was, you needed royal permission. And also if your children were going to have any kind of claim to the throne, so that's something that that's something else that could have come out of this, depending on who died, who lived. It's possible that, Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, his claim to the throne comes from Catherine of Valois marrying her squire, Owen Tudor, for love in a secret marriage after her husband, Henry V, had died. She got married for love to a squire, Owen Tudor, who was this Welsh guy who was the keeper of her wardrobe. And out of that is the one arm of the Tudors. So you never know who's going to die, who's going to live, what's going to happen. In 50 or 60 years, it's possible that somebody could trace something and say, well, you know what, actually I have a claim to the throne.
And if they, if Mary were to have a son and they're like, well, she Yeah, I mean, I can see how that would be.
And yeah,
kind of
and maybe
messy.
not even like who knows who that son might marry then. And then if that son marries Princess Elizabeth or something, you know, then you've got their children. And so if you were
or if that son marries Mary, Catherine's daughter, then he could claim like,
right.
that,
Exactly. Yeah. It's all starting.
it is.
Yeah. So so it was a really big deal. And
So
Mary,
it's just like a complicated mess, but it's so intriguing.
it is. And it, you know, this is a period where there's primogeniture, but there's also still the idea that you can become king by victory on the battlefield, which was how Henry Tudor ultimately then claimed it by killing Richard III. So if you have somebody who is able to have an uprising and has any kind of a tenuous claim at all because of marriage or anything like that, then you can have a future king on your hands.
And then during the show, you know, we talk a little bit during the show, like not too much so we don't sort of wear out our ideas. But you mentioned something about Mary possibly having children with the king.
Yeah. So there's rumors because is that either one or both of her children were fathered by the king. So there's no concrete evidence, but there's no concrete evidence that there's not. And, you know, they were sleeping together at that point, and that was kind of one of the things that Henry liked to do was have affairs with married women so that if they had kids, it
didn't look like
it was his.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's possible that
It's such a shame we can't go back and do DNA on all this stuff.
I know. Well, they did. I mean, that's how they identified Richard III. So I don't know if somebody would ever want to do that, but that's how they when they dug up Richard III's skeleton, they were able to check that it was him because of DNA on one of his descendants now. So that's how they confirmed that skeleton was him.
Yeah, was him.
Yeah. So they probably, I mean, if they had something of hers, if they had her.
But they would need the kids, I mean, to see if they were.
Oh, yeah, the descendants of the children.
Anyways. Interesting speculation.
So, yeah, it's possible.
What is your opinion, or do we know, or anything, how More and Cromwell felt about each other?
Yeah, this is interesting because in the Wolf Hall books, which I've talked about before because I do love them so much, it looks, Cromwell is really disdainful of More. And I think that would suit his character because of like what we talked about last time, that it's almost like Moore's just asking for this. It's almost like Moore's just like, please make me a martyr. And I think Cromwell was a survivor. Cromwell was scrappy. Cromwell was somebody who, you know, was born a nobody and scrapped his way up to that. And I think that he probably would have looked at Moore as being, you know, a little bit just like, why are you doing this? Like, and kind of just, why are you going to put your family through this? Like, why are you doing this? You don't have to do this. He probably would have felt sorry for him. And he probably would have thought he was misguided. But at the same time, Thomas More was Thomas More, you know, and he was a celebrity, and he was a famous humanist, and everybody admired him for his earlier work. And so I'm sure that he probably would have had very mixed emotions. He probably would have felt really bad that it was happening, and at the same time just thought he's such a silly person. Like,
and what about the other way, More?
I think More would have really looked down on Cromwell.
Just thought he was like
selling out.
Yeah.
Like you're you're gonna go to hell just because you have no beliefs at all.
Just because you're such a jerk. Like,
exactly.
Cold-hearted. Yeah. All right. Then we see a little scene with Moore's daughter in court. And she talked to Chapuis, or what's his name?
Yeah, Chapuis.
Would she have been allowed, like, in court? I mean, it wouldn't be like, oh, you're an enemy to us.
Yeah, I think she would have been able to go to court like that, yeah.
Okay.
And I think that her family did try to petition the king as much as possible. So I'm not sure that they actually had a scene like that where she showed up at a pageant. But she would have been able to... You know, the king... royal people, they were very accessible. like much more so than we imagine now. They would walk through, the king had a deal every Easter. He would wash feet and the queen would give out alms, and people were really, it was really important because so much of your right to rule was in some ways dry. You had to have the people's support to keep ruling. The people could overturn you really easily. So it was really important to be out there with your people. And so kings were a lot more accessible than we maybe imagine that they were.
Okay.
So she could have,
And then...
And I don't want to make it seem like anybody could just go up and talk to the king because there were guards and stuff.
But just more so than like now.
Yeah.
I mean...
Exactly.
You can't just go up and petition the president or the Queen of England because you feel like it.
Right.
Was Anne... It seems like Anne... Was Anne always obsessed with Catherine and Mary? Like it seems in the one scene where she was drunk and...
Yeah. I think she probably...
Was that just a constant, I guess?
Yeah. Because it was true, like she said, and that's a true quote, I believe, that she said, I'm her death and she's mine. Like, it's...
Well, that was about Mary. I mean, with was she always worried about Catherine retaking the queenship somehow? Or, like, it just seems like she's, to me, seeing all this, it seems like Catherine is clearly no longer a threat at all. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of seems a little overly paranoid of Anne.
Yeah.
But...
Well, I think she was worried about that just because of who Catherine was.
Because she wasn't just some person.
Yeah, she has the emperor on her side.
Yeah.
And
now the Catholic Church on her side just because we're picking sides.
And it really could seem like it was really an us against them kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it was. Yeah. I mean, it's like Anne and Henry and then the people that follow them against, not the world, but the Western world.
Yeah.
And then, so then you touched on the quote. She said about Mary that she is my death and I am hers. Like, that's a... Yeah,
I think it's apocryphal, but
What does apocryphal mean?
That, like, that they don't have, like, that it's come down through the ages.
I see, so we don't necessarily...
I don't think it's written down somewhere, but it's been a famous quote of hers for a long time.
Interesting. And what does she kind of mean by that? Like that they both pose a great danger to each other kind of thing? Or?
Well, no, basically, like, there's an end game. One of them's going to have to die.
I see.
Either she's going to have to die or I'm going to have to die.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, like, you can't keep going on with it like it is.
With it like it is, yeah.
So somebody's got to give something, and neither one of them seem like they're going to give anything, so one of them's going to have to die.
And she was right.
Yep.
One of them did die. Well, everyone dies, but you know what we mean.
Yes.
So Fisher seemed quite popular up on the executioner place. Mm-hmm. Like, was he a popular guy? Yeah,
and especially having been made a cardinal, I think that's something that we talk about a lot here is the importance of these kinds of people and of religion and of, what this meant. Like, we are so secular now, and it's hard for us post-Enlightenment to understand if you were made a cardinal by the Pope, that was a really big deal, and to have a cardinal be put to death was
an even bigger deal.
Yeah. And so even though the Reformation's coming, even though we can look back on it now and say, well, England becomes Anglican, blah, 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 blah. At the time, people didn't know that. At the time, people were still living the way they always had. Yeah. And he had been around for a long, he was Henry VIII's grandmother's confessor, so he'd been around for a long time. He'd done a lot of good work. The people who were alive, most living memory, people knew of him, and he was already a big deal. So, yeah.
And then did people like Fisher and Moore really get a chance to speak up there? So he would have gotten that chance to address the crowd.
Yeah, you were given a chance to do that. And for most people, it would have been quite scripted. Like Anne Boleyn, she talks about how good the king was to her. And it's like, no, he is really not. But, you also had to think about your family. So it was a bit of theater. Yeah. It was really quite a theatrical thing. You had to try, some people would kind of say coded things to try and get across what their point was. So it wasn't just the free for all, like the king's evil kind of thing, and you had to think about what was going to happen to your family.
I see.
And you could redeem your family, as it were. If you made a good speech, then you could think that the king was going to take mercy on your family.
I see.
And give them more money and stuff like that.
And then we have a weird little interlude where they show Michelangelo painting. Yeah. Like, was he around this time? Or?
So he was painting the Sistine Chapel, it said, between 1508 and 1512. So this is about 20-something, 25, almost 30 years off.
All right.
But I think they wanted to show that there was stuff going on there. I don't know. Something interesting.
Fun person to throw in.
Something really interesting, and I don't know if they were thinking this when they did it. I mean, it would be really crazy deep if they were. But it's possible that Anne Boleyn had met Leonardo da Vinci when she was in France as a young girl. And that timing matches up, and there's actually some different works that people say, might have been inspired by Anne and stuff like that, and also how Anne would have been influenced by Da Vinci, and so that's a little interesting tidbit that Anne and Da Vinci might have known. Well, she would have been a young girl, so it's not like she would have made that much of an impression on him, but it's possible that with as kind of charming and striking as she was, that she made an impression on Leonardo da Vinci.
And so they would throw in Michelangelo.
Right.
They were both Ninja Turtles, after all. Michelangelo and
See, that's why I say it would have been crazy deep, because now, as Anne's about to fall, they throw in Michelangelo, who is the other great rival of Da Vinci. And so maybe,
I kind of don't really see where you're going with this, but I like it.
Okay.
I like your thinking.
All right.
Okay, so in my eyes, and I get that in my eyes on this are limited to what the television show is showing me, but it seems sort of rather clear that it's all just kind of going to hell, like it's all falling apart. Like, he doesn't seem to care that much about Anne anymore. She gave him one daughter, and now she miscarried. He's having affairs all over the place. He's like killing all his oldest and longest, friends and supporters. Like, do we know, or maybe in your opinion, like, at any point did Henry kind of think, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? Or did he just kind of charge ahead and keep going with the madness?
I don't think he saw it as madness. I think that part of him thought, okay, now that we're on this course, we have to stay the course. But I also think that he really thought that he was right. I mean, I don't think he would have done all of this if there wasn't some part of him who believed that what he was doing was the right thing.
Yeah.
I think he would have been very frustrated. I think he probably, that scene where he's like, talking to the cross and saying, why is it like this? I think he probably felt like that a lot. And I think that he would have questioned kind of what was happening, but I don't think he questioned that he was right. And he really truly believed for the rest of his life, he believed that he was the person who was sent to take England out of darkness. And they have prayer books of his where he scribbled notes in the margins and stuff. And these are very personal, like his diary almost kind of thing. And he highlights passages about, David taking the Israels out, or whoever the person was taking the Israels out. And like he really saw his place as rescuing England from like this false religion. And even though he's remained Catholic in practice most of his life, he did educate his son as a Protestant. He did kind of stack the deck in the favor of Protestants once he died with the people that he put around. He made all reformers. And so I think that he was really, like many people, he was really torn on this subject of like the Reformation and what is the place of God? What is the place of the Pope? How does all of this... this is an institution that's 1,500 years old that's just being torn down all around you. And Henry was struggling with it as much as other people. Now, the difference is with Henry struggling with it, he gets to put people to death. Yeah. So... And
he's sort of like in charge of it and making the decision, like other people just were kind of going along with it.
And some of his settlements were compromises that made neither side happy. Yeah. That he was trying to do. And so I really think he really, really struggled with this. And I don't think he thought, oh, this was a bad idea. I think that he did believe that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was cursed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he did believe that this, was the way forward, but I think he was also very frustrated, and I think he probably questioned why it was happening like this.
Yeah.
And, kind of what was wrong with him,
Mm-hmm.
that this was happening to him, why me?
Yeah. All right, and were you trying to refer? Wasn't it Moses who led the Israelites out of Egypt?
David was the king.
Yeah, and he parted the Red Sea, and
yeah,
okay,
yeah, Moses.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little better in some history than you.
Yep.
All right. Do you think More really? Not that More did it, but do you think like More's actions really got into Henry's head?
Yes.
As portrayed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it must have. I mean, More was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And he'd been such a friend to Henry.
Mm-hmm.
They'd been so close. I don't know how you can not have that get into your head.
Yeah. Well, I know. I mean, you let him go. That's like you not let it get in your head. But I see what you're saying.
But and Henry said at the beginning he broke his promise. Like he did, and he was being so stubborn, just like Catherine. I'm not trying to say that he should have been killed for it, but it's like. You said you weren't going to speak out, and you spoke out. Like I feel like Henry had been very patient with him, in as much as he could. Like
when did he speak out? I don't.
Well, I guess he had those. He went to see Catherine, and
okay, so he did little things.
He did little things like that, and it's like
wasn't
dude,
100%
I told
loyal.
you could go, and I wasn't going to make a big deal of it if you didn't make a big deal of it, and
around.
You're not letting it go. Like if you don't want to be involved, you don't want to be involved. So stop thinking about it. Go move to Yorkshire, go move somewhere way far away and
write your books.
And write your utopia and stop involving yourself in it. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that's how Henry would have thought. Like he broke his promise, I'm going to break my promise.
Mm-hmm. Who was this Richard Rich guy? He sure seems like a real work of art.
He is. Richard Rich, he worked for Cromwell, and he was one of Cromwell's men, and we'll see him later on. He is a
And
he's
just kind of like a hired thug, if without beating people up, but
sometimes he did beat people up. Yeah,
he did some dirty work.
He did. One of the things he's famous for is in the trial of Anne Askew, who was one of the later Protestant martyrs that Henry killed in the late 1540s. One of the last, I think, 1546. She was the only woman to ever have been tortured. She was put on the rack. And Richard Rich turned the wheel himself because the person in the tower wouldn't do it. Like the person, he was like, I'm not doing that to her.
Get out of my way. I'll do it.
Exactly. And he did it. And so that's something Richard Rich is known for. He was
good guy. And is Anne Askew, is that really her name?
Uh-huh.
I just thought that was like a pseudonym or whatever.
That was her name.
All right. And was there really a trial for More like we saw? That was a thing. That was a real thing.
Yes, and we have a lot of records of it.
Okay.
We have a lot of quotes from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who were the people, there's three, judges or whatever you want to call them, the tribunal. Who were those people? Are those government people? Are they religious people? Are they judges? Who would those people have been?
Yeah, so I think there were 18 judges, and they were just people who were the chancellor, the privy council. Being accused with an act of attainder was different than a regular trial. You didn't have the same kind of rights if you were attainted as you had otherwise, so you didn't have to have a trial in front of your peers, for example. You could have a trial in front of Henry's men.
What's attainted?
That's what they said when you were when they felt that there was enough evidence of your treason to just put you to death almost immediately. They would put an act of attainder against you, which stripped you of your possessions immediately, put you in jail, and gave you a trial which was not considered a fair trial, but it was not designed to be a fair trial.
Yeah,
and
it's like we know you're guilty, but instead of just taking you straight to the execution, we'll do this little trial thing to sort of talk about it and get all the information out there or something. All right. So he was in trouble when he walked in.
Yes.
So he wasn't going to get out of things.
No.
All right. And I'm just amazed. These people are ruthless. I mean, this is 500 years ago, not even 500 years ago. and like they were gonna like drag him and then hang him till he was half dead, and then cut him down and take his bowels out and burn them in front of him, chop off his privy bits, chop off his head, cut him into 4 pieces.
Yep.
And any other good points I missed of the process?
that was the standard death for traitors, for treason. That was the standard thing.
Don't commit treason,
right? Jeez. I mean, and that's the other thing. Like, More was a lawyer. More knew all of this.
Yeah.
Like, none of this is a surprise to him. He could try cases. He knew the outcome of this, and he knew what was possible for him to have happened. Like, they don't show that in the show so much, but he was a lawyer. He had done this kind of thing. Yeah. So, yeah, that was the standard punishment for treason. So, I mean, don't commit treason.
To me, I know I said I was going to talk about this because this isn't us philosophizing, but to me it seems like kind of apparent that he's just like, it's just all like to be a martyr, it seems like it's not even like he's standing. I don't know. I just,
like you say, Henry, all of this and for what? Like him, all of this and for what?
Yeah, I that's what I don't get. I mean, like his family's there and he's saying, you know, hopefully I see you in heaven, but like they signed the paper. So if he actually believes that you're damning yourself by signing this agreement, they've damned themselves. So he has no chance of seeing them in heaven. Like him and Fisher is going to be the only 2 people in England who are going to be in heaven. And
right.
Like he doesn't, I don't know. It's just, yeah, for what? I don't.
Yep.
Oh, well, I mean, it is what it is. It would have been nice to, I guess, have had him around a little longer to write more humanist books.
Yeah. Well, I think he knew what he was doing. I believe. I think part of him thought he could argue his way out because he was a lawyer, that he was going to be able to do. And in the trial, it was a surprise when Richard Rich came.
I was going to say, like, if it wasn't for that, I mean, he could have, like, kind of had this moral high ground of I've never said anything about it. Like, I haven't denied anything. I just haven't talked about it.
Yeah.
So, damn you, Richard Rich.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's just interesting perspective, you know, chopping someone's head off is not necessarily a nice thing to do. But when the alternative is all that other stuff, it was quite sweet and caring of Henry to simply chop off his head.
And like he brought a special swordsman from France to chop off Anne's head, who was an expert.
That was good.
Yeah.
So he wasn't going to mess up.
Exactly.
So he killed you in the sweetest
possible
way he could think of.
Yes. Yeah. And apparently when Thomas More was being dragged to his execution spot, there were a lot of crowds, and some of the people that he had tried cases against came to see him, and one of them kind of heckled him and said, you know, that they lost their trial with him, blah, blah, blah. And it says here, to one wretched woman, he yelled back, "I very well remember the case, and if I were to decide it now, I would make the same decree." So there he is on his being taken to...
He sure is. These are real characters, these guys. I mean, personalities, I guess is what I mean. They're just something else.
Yeah.
And just to me, like, this is just like the nail on the crazy mind and place that Henry is in. It's like, I feel like he has officially lost the forest through the trees, like killing more, and, you know, like you alluded to, just for what? Like, he doesn't seem that into Anne anymore. It doesn't seem like he's going to get a son from her. Like, and he's just done all this, like, for what? I mean, I guess because his beliefs, but it just, to me, it's easier to look back, you know, and say for what. But man, like, for what? Like,
Well, you know, there are also a number of people who are Anglicans who look at him and say, well, he founded the Anglican Church, and he took us from papacy and all that kind of stuff. And so
for that
Reformation, I mean, the Reformation in England was not nearly as horrible and as bloody as it was in Europe, where you have the 30 Years' War and you have the
because the king just kind of swept in. It wasn't like this uprising of people.
And so the king killed some of his advisors, and like, not to make light of that, but you know, in the 1572 in France, a Protestant prince tried to marry a Catholic princess. I think it was one or the other. One was Protestant, the other one's. Anyway, out of that came the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, in which close to 50,000 people in France were killed over the course of 6 weeks. It was this massive,
like, how many people lived in France at that time? I mean, was it like a big chunk of their population?
It started in Paris, and it was just gangs of thugs going from house to house to house, killing people. There's stories of people, a pregnant woman that was in birth, and they cut her hands off to get her jewelry, and she was Protestant, and babies being thrown into the Seine. I mean, this like
and bloody. Like, they were after Protestants.
Yeah,
this point?
The Catholics were going after the Protestants at this point. And I mean, this is like, you look at that, you look at what was going on in Germany at the time, and you look at England, and you say, okay, Thomas More died. Like, I mean, not to make light of it, but you know, a couple hundred Protestants under Mary died. It wasn't
50,000 people.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah,
it's a lot of people.
It is.
My last question.
All right, boom.
Do you think, or do we know? Would Thomas More have blessed the executioner that was about to chop his head off?
Yes, you were supposed to do that. The executioner would always ask people for their forgiveness. It was and also sometimes you'd have to pay the executioner too.
So sounds about right.
Yeah, so you would give the executioner the money, and you would forgive them and say, you know, I forgive you for what you're about to do. Here's your fee. And so Thomas More said, "Pluck up thy spirits, man, and be not afraid to do thine office. My neck is very short. Take heed, therefore, thou not strike awry for saving thine honesty. I die the king's good servant, but God's first."
It's just a different time.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that we lose sight of living in the secular society that we live in, post-Enlightenment, all of that, is the idea that this life did not matter as much. This life was preparation for the next life. So
it's kind of like, like you're going to meet this dude in heaven or whatever.
Yeah.
And it would be messed up for you to slight him for his job on earth. That
and just the whole idea of dying, and of dying for your faith and all of that. You know, this life didn't matter. This life was just simply a practice for getting into heaven and for the next life. And you could take joy from it. You could have happiness from it. But in general, it wasn't like this. Anything that was on earth was secondary and it was fleeting and made no difference compared to the eternity you were going to have.
So, like, this is what's fascinating to me, just the difference in mindsets of humans from time to time.
Yeah.
I guess in 500 years, they will probably look back on our time and just think, like, how could they have thought these things? All right. Well,
I think that was it, right?
Those are my questions.
So, I think, a big theme to look at from this is just the idea that people at this time saw this all as a practice.
Yeah.
And I just think that, that's starting. And for the king, too. I think the king also, that could explain maybe why he didn't pardon.
Because there's a bigger picture. Like, there's a bigger thing going on, and like, I mean, in those terms, I can kind of see, like a bigger game sort of being played, and things like this are
and if he's really rescuing England from papacy, killing Thomas More,
it's like no big deal. I mean, if that's what has to be done, like whatever. Yep.
Yeah. All right. There you go. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to us.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that if you like this show, we would love it if you would give us a rating on iTunes. And
hopefully a good one.
Well, that's why I said if you like the show. Yeah. And you can learn more about us at watchingthetudors.com, which is also where you can learn more about my other podcast, the Renaissance English History Podcast.
Our other podcast is really awesome.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys, for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.